orphan whore, twitchy bitch. These are words that we generally don't use on the Senate floor, and these are words that were used by a therapeutic boarding school as part of a therapeutic practice for children. There were other words used in this licensed facility and others licensed by the Oregon Department of Human Services, but I cannot bring myself to say those words on this floor. Words that start with the letter F, a word that starts with the letter N. And I ask you what that means when we have words that our children endure that we cannot even speak on the Senate floor. But words were not the only thing that children in Oregon licensed care have been experiencing in recent years. Broken bones, sexual abuse, a lack of food, bed bugs, rats, and spiders, being forced to shoplift for tampons because none were provided, being forced to dry off with paper towels because there were not actual towels in the home. Children who complained were labeled troublemakers. CASAs who complained were called troublemakers. Parents who complained were called ungrateful. DHS workers who complained were ignored. When we first started learning about these issues last year, we had a hearing about it, and DHS officials came, listened to testimony from a former staff member at one of these organizations in Portland, and said how surprised and shocked she was that this was the first that the department had ever learned of these things. Unfortunately, we learned through public records release that it was not the first time, not in a few months, not in a few years, but for an entire decade. We learned that investigators of abuse who saw these things went directly to the top officials of child welfare, the director of child welfare, the director of licensing, and the former director of the Department of Human Services. And these people, knowing about these broken bones, knowing about the sexual abuse, knowing about the lack of food, did nothing. Instead, they directed subordinates to cut checks outside of state policy, to continue placing children in facilities that they knew had no licenses, and to be careful not to offend the providers that were causing these injustices to these children. Such behavior and disregard for the safety and dignity of kids in state care isn't just immoral, it should be criminal. And this bill makes that so. Senate Bill 1515 addresses the licensing and oversight of licensed care. And I want to be very clear, this bill is not about provider agencies. This bill is about the Oregon Department of Human Services and holding accountable the Department of Human Services to maintain the safety and dignity of children that are in the care of the state. And this is how we do this through the bill. First, the bill establishes very clear, unquestionable tools and an unquestionable mandate for the Department of Human Services to take action whenever kids are unsafe in the care of the state. The bill also provides for better transparency of substantiated allegations of abuse. For the first time, the legislature will receive quarterly reports that include summaries of substantiated allegations of abuse in licensed facilities. That will help us make better decisions about what is abuse, what isn't, and refine our policies to better meet the needs of children and providers. The bill for the first time extends protections to 18 to 21-year-olds who are in state care. Right now, when those individuals are abused, when they're neglected, if they're sexually assaulted, we do not have the ability to address that because our statute does not provide protection for 18 to 21-year-olds. This addresses that. The bill looks forward and provides better support for our providers. Our provider agencies, in the vast majority of cases, are doing incredible work for some of the most vulnerable and traumatized kids in this state. And they need better support to do that work. And that's why this bill starts to set the framework for the Center for Continuous Improvement, which will be a peer-driven technical support program for providers moving forward, and our hope is for that to start July of 2017. And the bill also allows us to look at accreditation for the Department of Human Services, national accreditation, to bring our state into the forefront of protecting children. Now, there are a couple of things that the bill does not do. The first, it does not put new regulations on providers. Like I said, this is not a bill about providers, this is a bill about the department. In fact, this bill removes some redundant reporting requirements. The bill also does not solve the problem. We have many, many issues for the kids in our state that need our care the most. And one of those is that we have some responsibility in this too, have failed to appropriately invest in these licensed facilities with these providers. Many providers are turning contracts back because they simply cannot afford to provide the services. We have to recognize when you have severely abused and neglected children, it's about more than a warm bed and a warm meal, which should be the very minimum that these kids are getting, but also about how do we heal these children and prepare them to move into adulthood successfully. And that doesn't come for free. We are going to have to invest in that and come back after this session to continue working on that in partnership with our providers. The last thing that the bill doesn't do, it cannot undo what happened in the past to these kids. I had the opportunity to meet with 2 children that lived at Give Us This Day within the past year. Meeting with them was one of the most moving experiences that I've had in my life, and I went back with Clyde Psyche, who also personally sat down to meet with them. One of the girls who talked about having to shoplift tampons said, "I know that stealing is wrong and I'm really ashamed of it, but when you are really hungry or you need a tampon and it's your only choice, well, you really don't have a choice." We owe these children that experienced this neglect and this abuse an apology. Because I can tell you at the end of an hour-and-a-half conversation with these girls, one of them said, "What happened to us was really bad, but we're bad kids, so we probably deserved it." I told these kids they do not deserve it, nobody deserves it, they deserve much better. So on behalf of the state, I would like to offer those kids my apology and would like to thank Clyde Psyche for stepping in as the new director of the Department of Human Services. Already, he has issued 2 letters of intent to revoke for other providers that are failing to meet the needs of kids. One of those is now closed. The governor has personally intervened into this situation, both appointing Clyde Psyche and appointing an outside review committee. The providers, the Department of Justice, CASA, and foster youth who have raised their voices to talk about how we can make a better system have all come together to address these very, very serious problems. And I really would like to thank the Department of Justice, because without their Charitable Activities Division, the program that those girls lived in that I talked about would still be open today. The Department of Human Service never revoked their license. They never issued any penalty to this organization, not one. The only reason that they aren't operating today is because they failed to keep the appropriate records as a charitable program. Colleagues, I hope that you will join me in supporting this bill. It's the beginning of a lot of hard work we need to do. The worst thing we could do is pass this and pat ourselves on the back and say it's done. This is the low-hanging fruit. This is the easiest part of the work, and we need to come back session after session to let these kids know that they deserve only the very best. When we take custody of these children as wards of the state, they need to know that they are safe, that they are cared for, and that they are loved. This bill is the first step in doing that, but again, only the very beginning. Thank you, Madam President.
Is there further discussion? Senator Cruz.